we are going to talk about a British illustrator best known for his spectacular science fiction book covers and for his works in movie production as a concept artist. His influence reached a generation of artists and revolutionized science fiction and fantasy art in the 70s. Christopher Foss was born in 1946 in Guernsey, Channel Islands, less than a year after the end of World War II. The Channel Islands had been occupied by German troops from 1940 until 1945, the only part of the British Isles to be invaded. The Nazis built a series of fortifications around the coast of Guernsey and the larger island, Jersey, and these imposing structures made a lasting impression on Chris. He said, "The German fortifications in Guernsey were almost brand new when I was exploring them for about the age of 7. And as we will see later, these structures, such as tower bunkers and various war artifacts, would become a recurring element in his art, since this structure fascinated him at such a young age." Later, Chris would start a boarding school in Dorset, where his art teacher would encourage him to practice for an art scholarship. This teacher was a great support for him. He taught him all about perspective and representational knowledge. As we can see, his desire to be an artist started for a very young age. He loved drawing, but it was not his only interest. Like any British boy in the early 50s, he liked the Cowboy Annuals and the Journey into Space radio series. Although, at that time, Chris did not find science fiction that interesting. In fact, he found movies of the genre a bit ridiculous, since to him it looked like a bunch of people in tinfoil suits. It was until he saw Creature from the Black Lagoon that he took science fiction a little bit more seriously. But something that he took a lot more seriously was his artistic career. In his early adulthood, he entered Magdalen College, and while studying, he began to look for commissions for magazines, and his professional career began precisely with one of those, but an unexpected one in retrospect. Penthouse magazine, which had been founded in 1965. Chris Foss sent samples of his work to the Penthouse publisher Bob Guccione, who soon hired him to draw a series. Although the theme of that series was predictably adult, its graphic background is closely linked to the environment in which the British illustrator had grown up and anticipated the direction his style would later take. The collaboration with Guccione would not stay with what was done at Penthouse, as the publisher would later go to Omni, where they also worked together. Omni was a magazine published in the United States and the United Kingdom, containing articles of science, parapsychology, and short works of science fiction and fantasy. Some of those stories courtesy of William Gibson or George R.R. Martin. There, Guccione recommended Chris to go to watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the film fascinated him and served as a catalyst for the artist to embrace science fiction and put his talent at the disposal of that genre. He did not like to use photographic references to paint and draw, so it fit perfectly with science fiction art. By the end of the 70s, the science fiction books did not have very elaborate covers. Many were covers with abstract designs. When Foss entered that field, everything around him shook. His design broke with everything established in that genre. Organic-looking ships with protrusions, bulky vehicles with pronounced and asymmetrical angles. And if that was not enough to call the attention of any reader, the color palette he used was bright colors that made the ships look like huge space insects plowing through alien landscapes where human beings were totally absent. The designs, composition, and colors made any cover stand out from the rest on bookstore shelves. Isaac Asimov's Foundation Trilogy, novels by Arthur C. Clarke, Philip K. Dick, or Jack Vance, among many others, benefited from his imagination. At this time, he worked at an almost superhuman rate. He finished 3 covers per week. The number of illustrations for books exceed 1,000, and in addition to working for publishers, he also did it for advertising agencies. But this frenzy of artistic work was not motivated by an excessive passion for his art. It had more to do with financial need, since he was not yet 30 years old and already had a family to support. Due to his busy work schedule, he did not have time to read the books to which he had to make a cover, but that was not a problem for him, rather the complete opposite. Despite the fact that his art was very well adjusted to science fiction, it was not the genre that he liked the most, and he also liked to have total creative freedom in what he did. That is why his illustrations were not entirely related to the history of the books, but that did not take away a bit of spectacularity and ability to attract readers. Publisher knew very well that a book with a cover signed by Foss would sell better than one without it, which explained his long career in the genre. Although his predilection fell on huge mechanical or architectural constructions, Foss was very capable of representing the human figure. This allowed him to illustrate erotic figures in the sexology manual The Joy of Sex, that enjoyed great popularity in the early 70s. Chris ventured into cinema, making concept art for Alejandro Jodorowsky's never completed Dune along with other fellow artists such as Mobius and H.R. Giger. Then he worked for several months doing studies for Alien, even though they weren't used for the movie, as well as for Dino De Laurentiis' Flash Gordon, the first Superman film, where he did some designs of the planet Krypton, and another unfinished film by its director Stanley Kubrick's Artificial Intelligence, a project that Steven Spielberg would later take on to bring it to the big screen. By the 90s, he moved away from publishing houses and concept art, since at that time he could earn a more convenient living selling his art through other means, including his website. In 2014, director James Gunn used Chris' illustrations in his meeting with Marvel executive and pitched himself as a director for the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Marvel liked it so much that they hired the British illustrator to work on the movie. The paintings of Chris Foss pushed the illustration of fantasy and science fiction books to another level during the 70s. With his talent with the brush and the airbrush, he inspired new generation of artists like Jim Barnes, Peter Elson, Tony Roberts, or Angus MacKee. They follow in the wake left by Foss as if they were those enormous space insects that crossed the infinite space of his imagination.